Hello and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the DPRK has threatened to launch missiles near the U.S. territory of Guam. Does Trump's warning to unleash fire and fury towards Pyongyang play into Kim Jong Un's hand? Chinese consumers are shifting their spending habits from material goods to inconspicuous products. How can we interpret this consumption trend? What does it mean for China? And we begin with the tensions between the DPRK and the United States. Pyongyang says a planned strike near the U.S. territory of Guam will take place in mid-August. The threat comes after Trump said Pyongyang would be met with fire and fury if it was to continue with provocations and missile launches. Before we go to our panelists about what exactly is likely to happen for the future, take a look at this first.
A war of words. President Donald Trump on Thursday hardened his fire and fury warning, saying maybe that tough talk wasn't tough enough.
He does something in Guam, it will be an event the likes of which nobody's seen before, what will happen in North Korea.
Early on Wednesday, the DPRK issued a new threat that the nation is considering striking the U.S. base in Guam. It comes hours just after President Trump told Pyongyang that any threat to the U.S. will be met with fire and fury.
The Korean People's Army Strategic Force is now carefully examining operational plans to envelope Guam with fire, using the medium to long-range strategic ballistic rocket Hwasong-12.
About 4 hours flight from Tokyo, Guam is the easiest bit of American territory for Pyongyang to reach. Officials in Guam say it would take about 14 minutes for the missile to reach the island once fired. Authorities have dismissed the DPRK's talk of missile strikes, saying the U.S. military stands ready to defend its territory.
I think what the president was just reaffirming is the United States has the capability to fully defend itself from any attack and defend our allies, and we will do so. And so the American people should sleep well at night.
In a show of force, the U.S. flew 2 strategic bombers over the Korean peninsula in a training mission with Japanese and South Korean fighter planes. Calls are mounting in the South for Seoul to build nuclear weapons of its own to defend itself. A South Korean bomb would infuriate Pyongyang and push it further away from the negotiating table.
Is the war of words mere rhetoric or a dire warning? Our panelists weigh in. We have in our Beijing studio Yang Xiyu, who is a senior research fellow from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome, sir, to our program. We are also having Oh In-yu, who is a professor at Korea University, joining us in Seoul, South Korea. And in Washington, D.C., in the U.S., we invited Jonathan Pollack, senior fellow at the Center for East Asia Policy at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. Let me begin by asking Mr. Pollack, what is the biggest danger now with the at least exchange of harsh words? A military conflict between the North and the U.S.?
Well, the biggest danger would obviously be a conflict between the United States and North Korea. And it seems to me the fundamental issue is one of war avoidance, not of steps that would take us on the path to war. I cannot tell you exactly what President Trump's motivation might have been to make these statements. I consider them very imprudent and inappropriate. And if there are real dangers and risks of war, these are kinds of discussions that should be held in private with relevant governments, not conveyed in presidential comments from his vacation retreat.
Okay, if Mr. Pollack, you do not want to reveal exactly what Mr. Trump said to us again, let me read some of those quotes which you at least consider as unpleasant. So one of those is, all the military solutions now are in place, loaded and locked. Secondly, is that maybe those threats are not even strong enough for the North Koreans. That's what he said. Also, even though there are different voices coming from the administration, Professor Oh, in South Korea, what do you think these exchange of rhetoric bombs, at least, would eventually lead to?
Well, in South Korea, everything is very calm and silent because we are having a last pitch of the summer vacation here, I think, in Seoul at least. Well, what they're taking here in South Korea is probably a rhetoric that's gone too far. So I think there will be some reason coming back between all these parties involved so that in the end, peace will resettle on the peninsula. What's bothering us, though, is the absolute silence from the South Korean government itself, because they don't seem to be very concerned about this because they are spending more time dealing with other issues at the moment. So South Koreans as a people are confused, but we don't know what to do with it.
Okay, before I go to the Chinese guests, I want to come back to the both of you once again. To the South Korean guest, Professor Oh, does the South Korea know to a certain extent as to the military, missile, and nuclear preparedness of the North at this point?
Well, we're 100% sure. We're 100% sure that North Korea has something that can actually sway a lot of people's decisions on their favorite terms, including United States. Trump has probably two options to play with. One is to acknowledge North Korean missiles capabilities at least. Number two, use forces to quell down all the missile bases. But either one is very plausible to us, to many people, including South Koreans and also Chinese people and Japanese people here. So because this is very confusing to us, at least in the sense that Trump is not making himself very clear about this situation.
All right.
And this is a very blunt speech from the U.S. president, who himself seems very lost about all this.
Okay.
The only thing he's showing to us is the anger. That's all we get here.
Anger, but the military preparedness that was also President Trump was talking about, and we also heard the latest news from the military, Mr. Pollack, that if the president gives the order, the military have no other options. Okay. So what is, according to you, Mr. Pollack, your understanding of the U.S. military preparedness? What exactly is it, if you could describe to a certain extent?
Sure. Sure. Oh, absolutely. The United States has planned for war in Korea ever since the last war ended. There's no news in that. The presumption of all of that has always been, if North Korea were to initiate another conflict, invasion of the South, or take other kinds of steps against South Korea or Japan, that the United States would respond. It has a full range of options to deal with that scenario. What President Trump, though, at least in his words, is raising something very, very different. He's talking, it has the flavor of what we call preventive war. In other words, a war that the United States would initiate on its own, independent of whether North Korea or anyone else was or was not doing. Now, the fact that he has uttered these words doesn't mean that the United States is about to do this. I see very little evidence of any kind of a mobilization of American forces that would enable this to undertake it. But again, words count, and my biggest concern is that there would be some horrific miscalculation in this situation. To be very frank with you, Tianwei, in an ironic way, what Trump has said benefits the domestic agendas of both President Trump and of Kim Jong Un. It conveys a sense that we're threatened on either side, but it's not going to the brink, but it is very, very useful as a political device, frankly, both from the White House and from the leadership of the North.
Mr. Yang, you are a seasoned analyst, so let me ask you about this very specific one.
Well, please.
1994, U.S. threatened to bomb Yongbyon nuclear plant. At the time was under developing in North Korea. Eventually, then the administration gave up that option. And we don't know the reason. But now we heard the rhetoric coming back to a high tension. The rhetoric, I'm here emphasizing. How should we understand the rhetorics now compared to a possible action back in 1994 for the United States?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's an immediate danger of war at all now, but we are indeed facing a slowly growing danger of war triggered by the further tests and a military attack from the United States, backed by the South Korea on North Korea. And the reason just come from the case you mentioned in 1994. You said you don't know the reason, but I do know.
Go ahead.
And I worked there in Washington, D.C. in 1994 when U.S.
In the Chinese embassy.
Yes, when U.S. determined to have the so-called surgery military strike on Pyongyang. But what the reason they give up? Simply because the then President Kim Jong Un strongly opposed the plan. So that case revealed the fact, say, without South Korea's endorsement or participation, there's no possibility for American unilateral military strike on South Korea. For example,
on North Korea, you mean?
On North Korea, yeah. In South Korea, ROK constitution covers the all peninsula as their sovereignty. So legally speaking, if any other country like the United States want to military strike that land, that means strike the land without South Korea. You can see it's an illegal meeting. Okay. So that is why when the then President Clinton determined to do that, and then they had to consult with the counterpart from Seoul.
All right. Professor Oh, wow, you got a lot of responsibility there. According to Mr. Yang here in China, South Korea, Seoul actually got the trigger for whether you have a war or not with North, between U.S. and North. What do you say?
I totally agree with Professor Yang because it is in the South's position to prevent any war from occurring on the peninsula, especially in the 21st century. We are expecting a peaceful resolution between the North and South for ages, really, since the beginning, since the end of the war, the first war. So I think it's in the President Moon's intention to stop all. It has all possible means he has to stop the war from occurring again, and I think he is very absolutely committed to that.
Mr. Polak, do you agree with that? That the trigger is in the South Korea's hands? But on the other hand, you also heard arguments that South Korea, Japan, and some of the others in the region are worried that the U.S. is not going to sacrifice the city of Boston, the city of Chicago, the city of New York for an ally.
Well, I think what's important to note here is that senior U.S. officials are quietly trying to calm things down, both publicly and privately. I noted that overnight, I read that General McMaster, the National Security Advisor, has been in discussion with the National Security Advisor in Seoul, and the United States has pledged full consultations on whatever steps it would undertake. But again, let me emphasize, I agree very much with Yang Xiyu, both about the stipulations in the South Korean Constitution, but also about the fact that we are not on the edge of war. If there is any benefit, and I use that term advisedly, to what has transpired over the last several days, it has been to underscore to everyone the extraordinary risks that are posed by this war of words, and by the potential that it could go in horrific directions. I don't think people remotely grasp the kind of conflict we could see ourselves in. And when I say we, I mean all the involved countries. One way or another, this would not so much envelop Guam, right. It would envelop the entire Korean peninsula. So let me emphasize, though, North Korea's statement doesn't surprise me at all. They make those kinds of statements all the time. What they emphasized is all of this was on the presumption that these are plans and that they will be presented to Kim Jong Un, and that would depend on what the United States does. So if the United States does not undertake any kind of major military actions, I don't expect the North to do that either. It would still remain a situation of deterrence without it being resolved.
Yeah. Just to follow up, there has been comments about, Mr. Polak, it used to be the case that rhetoric is flying from one direction. At the time, the weaker North Korea. And now you see rhetorical bombs flying both directions, from Washington and Pyongyang toward one another. And it's escalating as days go by. And also, there are personal attacks we've seen in those rhetorics between President Trump and also the leader in North Korea. That's one part of the story. The other part of the story, people in the U.S. also talk about, well, let's rethink what the North Koreans have been saying. They make a whole sentence. The first part is, if the United States goes against the North Korea with military threat, the North Korea would. That's the second part. So they argue U.S. has failed to listen to the first part, only try to listen to the second part for now. All I'm asking is, understanding both sides of the stories, where the eventual story, Mr. Pollack, is going. In other words, how will Washington as a whole judge the direction of the wind?
Well, I think that President Trump's repeated comments have greatly aroused both the political forces in the United States, the media. It's relentless. Even for me, it's all the time that you get asked questions. There are deep concerns. But again, it's very striking to me. There's another person we haven't heard from over in recent days, and that's Kim Jong Un. He has had nothing to say. His commander of strategic rocket forces is the one who made that statement. So he's been quiet. Even President Trump, in his latest tweet just this morning, has said he hopes Kim Jong Un chooses a different path, which you could argue is not quite as threatening. But it gets back to the fundamentals here, Tianwei. As I'm sure Yang Qiyu would fully acknowledge, we're not in 1994 anymore. We are in a very, very different strategic environment, and where the risks, the capabilities are far greater than before. And that just, to me, underscores the absolute need for prudence and restraint on the part of all parties, lest we find ourselves in a conflict that I don't really believe anyone seeks.
Mr. Yang, since Mr. Pollack already called your name, you have to respond.
Well, I'm not meaning there's no the possibility of the war at all, but I do say if South Korea changed the current idea, then the danger of war is really going high. But now it's pretty low, simply because of the different thinking between Washington and Seoul, between the President Trump and President Moon. So at this moment, I don't think the rhetoric bombs against each other will lead to inevitable an end war. Yeah.
Let's think about this. If we cannot judge, at least given all the rhetorics, because they are not basis for real sound judgment, let's look at history. What happened in history that can help us to understand what's going on? The Cuban Missile Crisis, for example. Mr. Oh, you, as a history reader, must also know that, Professor Oh from South Korea. President Kennedy, at the time, gave the president of Russia a chance to make a different decision. In other words, he didn't squeeze all the way, so that the other party could still have some options. And that's, according to many, why something like a war did not happen. Okay, here is the current situation. Of course, it's nuclear, it's different. But there is also some analogies that we can draw here. Can we draw the analogy? What kind of analogy can we draw? Will the Trump administration draw the analogy? And will the North Korea, like then Russia, I mean, at the time, USSR, make a different choice? Professor Oh.
Well, back then in 1994, there was a KEDO solution for the whole situation in North Korea. Back then in Cuba, in 1962, they had the same solution. That is, they could still talk through the hotline. Here we have everything. In the south, in the north, we have hotline. We have KEDO possible six-party talks. Well, all the options other than military direct military attack on North Korea. So here, as long as North Korea doesn't provoke any missile attack around Guam, as President Trump is asking, as long as President Trump considers possible, talks again between the United States and North Korea, I think there will be still solutions and the possible analogies of not provoking any war, a hot war using nuclear missiles. So the human beings in the history have avoided actual nuclear confrontations between powerful countries. And I think we have all the capability to do so again, as long as we believe it.
Well, really? Is that going to be the case? Okay, there is likely to be a strike according to North Korean side, mid-August. Of course, you could say there are preconditions. On the other hand, the North Koreans are likely to launch another missile, possibly ICBM as well, and further doing nuclear tests if no negotiation is really underway. So we're likely to see these hyper tensions one by one ever more closer to one another. Mr. Pollack, very briefly from you.
Yes, no, I think you've brought us back to the other issues, that if North Korea's continued development persists, that's the reality, exactly. This is where statements that say, I mean, Trump has not been specific, actually, about what, other than saying he doesn't want any more threats from North Korea. That gives him what we might call wiggle room. But I don't think in any way it minimizes the dangers and the risks that are here. The United States is about to undertake August exercises with the ROK, and those exercises generally trigger sharp words and sometimes actions from North Korea. So this will be a crisis-laden, potentially crisis-laden month, which calls for extremely prudent judgment on the part of all parties involved.
All right. Before we go, one sentence, and one sentence only, gentlemen, from every one of you. What's likely to happen with these rhetoric bombs flying around us every day, many times every day? Professor Oh Ying-yu, one sentence.
Well, we can rebuke all the security problems right now and hope for peace soon.
Mr. Jonathan Pollack.
I do not see us on the edge of conflict. I also do not see us on the edge of negotiation. Maybe discussion, but certainly not a real negotiation. The differences are too intractable.
Mr. Yang, last but not least.
Certainly, there's a further tests, either nuclear or missile, but certainly no missile attack surrounding Guam at all. And the tension will last without exit for a while.
I guess, gentlemen, you're all very realistic guys, I have to say. Thank you so much for being with us. We hope the future will be brighter as we predicted. We'll see how things have been going. Yang Xiyu, Oh Ying-yu, Jonathan Pollack, really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us. Have a great weekend. At least we can enjoy peace for now. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live on CGTN. Still to come on our program. Chinese consumers are shifting their spending habits from material goods to inconspicuous products. How can we interpret this consumption trend? Welcome back. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. Luxury goods are significantly more accessible than in the past here in China. This is a result of mass production economy of the 20th century. The rich and the middle class, the upper middle class, have begun using much more intangible goods to signify wealth and status. These new status behaviors are called inconspicuous consumption, which is different from material consumption only. To know more, take a look.
Material life or quality life? With the development of society and people's knowledge, modern people intend to choose the latter. We've seen the arrival of a middle-class consumer market that demands more material goods at a cheaper price. Now both the rich and the middle class can buy designer handbags and new cars. But the rich now prefer to spend on services, education, and human capital investments over purely material goods. This behavior was called inconspicuous consumption, and the trend has taken root in China. Most of the Chinese middle class are no longer keen to purchase material luxury goods. They now prefer services and self-improvement, investing more on health, travel, and education. They tend to focus on the quality of life instead of the material satisfaction.
I think Chinese people are now more well educated, and they have more chances to travel around, and they have experience they have the experience to learn from the culture from around the world.
Inconspicuous consumption is a means to a better quality of life and improved social mobility for one's own children, whereas conspicuous consumption is a status symbol for sale. For today's China, transferring consuming habits not only will affect consumers' quality of life, but will also affect the future life chances of the next generation.
And for more on the Chinese consumption and the change of the consuming habits, we are now joined in our Beijing studio two panelists, Liu Baocheng, who is the Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, sir. Also joining us here in Beijing, we want to welcome back Shi Yan, who is the Executive Director of the Shared Harvest CSA Farm in Beijing. Welcome. I want to have Mrs. Shi here in our show because she has a lot of stories to tell. And I understand in Chinese cities, many of your customers, actually middle class, upper middle class here in this country, they want fresh food from farm to their dinner table. So how do you see that is changing the consuming habits? Give us some of the examples that you are very familiar with.
Actually, about 10 years ago, when I introduced this kind of model, CS model, to consumers, they are not
CS model meaning
community-supported agriculture. It means directly link consumers with farmers. And when I talk about this model, people will asking what does that mean? What does organic food mean? But
more than 10 years ago, that was.
Yeah, that's 10 years ago. But now, if you talk about organic food, healthy food and this kind of model directly deliver organic food from the farm to table is kind of very familiar in Beijing.
And they agree to pay much more than what they would get at the supermarket.
Yeah, I think they are kind of value driven. Some of the consumers, they worry about food safety, they want healthy food. But some of the consumers, they're really value driven because they care about the environment. So they want to pay more to pay for the environment cost to reduce chemical residue to the soil on the food.
This is an interesting case study. Before I go to Professor Liu to analyze about that, let me ask you even further. How have you seen the number of your customers changing over the years? Let's just say from 10 years ago to now.
10 years ago, the first year we only got 50 members, and now we have about 1,000 families.
Amazing. But of course, that's been very tough 10 years for you to develop that idea here in China. Professor Liu, that is, of course, what Mr. Shi talked about. One of those many examples, in a way, really reflecting the consuming habits change here in this country. China's changing so fast, Professor Liu. You know better than
exactly.
I do.
Yeah, actually 10 years ago, I was about to do this, and then, I eventually gave it up, so I sold my share of the farm. So it's quite a contrast of the experience. But yes, I think basically, the Chinese middle class is rising to from living standard now to quality of life. So which is really a big transformation. And by quality of life, on one side, it means to enrich their mind through education, through entertainment, and the other is to build their body, for sports, health, and then also for the quality of food. So I think the part of it goes to this one. So and now they are even expanding their soul in caring about the environment through DIY, through volunteer type of work, so that they can really contribute more to what they believe in. So this is something that is really inspiring.
It's very interesting to think about this. I mean, the sheer size of the Chinese market is really going to make a huge statement for where the world is going. And when you say their consuming habits, it's more about self-related now. It's not just about I carry a bag and I let you to see what kind of bag that I have, or a coat, or a shirt, or a glasses, but a watch, but rather what is going to be the potential me. and what is going to be the value system that I reflect in the way that I consume. This means, sure, when you talk to your customers, and you yourself is actually a doctor in agricultural studies, how do you see this change? What does it mean?
You know, when our consumers at the beginning, they were talking with you about, you know, how this farm can be sustainable. Like mostly they will ask about, like at the beginning they will ask about how in economic part how this system can be sustainable. But later they will also ask about, like you know, how you deal with the pest control, or how you deal with the fertilizer. And also they want to take their kids to come to the farm to be more, you know, to experience, to know where their food come from, how this food produced. And this is a kind of, I think this is not only on the first industry as from agriculture, but also it's kind of the second industry and the third industry.
You become a service industry even,
yeah,
because you're providing tourism in a way.
Yeah.
You're providing a lifestyle business to people.
Yeah, and also the consumers, I think they are changing their mind to be more conscious consumption, because they know actually the money where they goes is actually their kind of voting. So where the money goes, they vote for. You know, if you pay to buy only the kind of cheap food, it means you give farmer less money. You pay less money to farmers. But now they are not only care about the healthy, you know, part of food, but also care about like social justice
and also social justice.
Fair,
so actually,
yeah,
this multi-purpose consumption that we are talking about here, Professor Liu.
Well, I think now primarily they have more confidence in themselves. Ostentatious consumption is really to show under scarcity. I think number one, they have more disposable income. Number two, they are more educated. Number three, they have access to a whole variety of stuff. So you can have a Mercedes, I can have a BMW, so what's the big deal?
And I would probably just ride the shared bicycles.
Exactly. So, and then, you know, particularly when China is getting more globalized, and also all the custom tariffs are being substantially reduced, so at any time you can get it, so you do not have the sense of anxiety. You know, I must have it, I must show to everybody. So, and then, you know, from confidence you go to sophistication. So, you know, you have more way of expressing yourself instead of just to show in material. So you show that how educated you are, you show that how you can make a special humor even on the WeChat. So that's something that you earn more of respect than envy. So that's,
but you know, it is a very encouraging sign, but at the same time, we all know, Ms. Shi, these days China is talking about supply side economic reform, meaning the supply side of the market cannot meet the speed of change when it comes to demand side. And that's exactly what we're talking about here, the consuming habit that's been changing. And the businesses are not fast catching up with the changing of the consuming habits. So here is the thing, what is lacking in this whole chain of whether production, thinking, business models, and other factors? Because you've been working on this for 10 years, so probably you know better than most of us. What is lacking? Why there's such a slow change toward where the demands are?
I think this is especially in agriculture industry.
Tell us more.
Because you can see in our industry, it's not very attractive for young people to come in working in our industry. And also,
actually, I was surprised 10 years ago about your choice.
Yeah, it seems there are more and more young people coming, but it's still not be the, especially for like in Beijing,
Right.
many university students, they will not choose agriculture as their first choice. And also we noticed from our supply side, we have many farmers, but the quality of the food, how can we build the trust, and also how we deliver the information to the consumers, because now consumers they are willing to pay more, but they don't know if this is the quality they want to buy.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, from supplier side, as a marketing professor, I always say there are 3 levels. Number 1, you satisfy existing demand.
Okay.
Number 2, you are able to anticipate what they can change tomorrow. So and number 3 is that you are able to lead their demand. So by creating value, by showing a new lifestyle, that actually what you have been doing is really to lead the demand. You already reached on the highest level of supplier side. Actually,
But the others are not necessarily catching up. There are some, but not necessarily that much.
That's right. But of course, from the consumption pattern, you have innovators and you have laggards. So as long as you are able to catch the middle class or upper middle class, innovators, so the laggards will eventually follow. So therefore, you make a change in the entire consumption paradigm.
Talking about the entire consumption paradigm, China is really such a big economy in the world, and it's gradually becoming a consumption-driven economy as consumers are becoming more selective about where they spend their money. From 2005 to 2010, personal consumption contributed 32% of GDP growth. And 5 years later, the number rose to 41%. The country's millennials are increasingly passionate for buying experiences, for traveling, private lessons, dining, and other high-quality services, seeking a more balanced life where health, family, and experiences take priorities. As you mentioned, all of you, that it is because people are getting more confident and people already have their basic needs met beautifully. They want something more. Something not just to show to the others, but something to enrich their heart and their experiences. Having said that, though, how many of them are like this? I mean, are we sitting here in the beautiful studio in Beijing talking about a small proportion of the Chinese population, while the rest of the Chinese population are probably still struggling to be where the middle class is? So are we talking about something, a small percentage, or are we talking about something very likely to become such an explosion of consumers? Professor Liu, I let you go first.
Well, most of the forecasts would say, okay, right now it's between 5% to 16%, depending on different definition of what is the middle class, and by 2020, so we are about to have from 16% to 32%. So this is something that people anticipate the rising middle class. And plus, there are also interesting phenomena. There is quite a generation gap. So even if you are among the middle class, because of the different age group, your consumption pattern is totally different.
Because you grow up differently.
Because for our generation, yes, we have more disposable income and we have higher education, but we still remember what we had 30 years ago.
And therefore, you're changing habits.
So we still are very conservative, and we want to save more. But for younger generation millennials like my son, he has double insurance. He has his own social insurance, and he has insurance from me.
Okay.
So therefore, he can really enjoy.
This is an interesting question. We only have 2 minutes left, but I do need to ask that question. That is, are we talking about a very privileged generation? I mean, this generation is the only child of the family. They got the 2 parents and grandparents, many of them, to take care of them. Therefore, they could take a big step in their consumption habit. But what about in the future? Can they still continue to do that? Is this going to be sustainable? Ms. Shi.
I think for our generation, we want to have more diversified culture and choice. So I think in the future, this kind of middle class will still keep on this kind of consumption way. And also, I noticed there are some numbers are talking about right now in China about 23% of middle class people. That's kind of the whole population of American country. So I think this kind of population will drive China economy to a different way, different period.
A very different world that we are talking about compared to where we are today. But thank you so much helping us to understand better, always the secrets of China and mysterious. Thank you so much, Liu Baocheng, Shi Yan. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Xin Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next week for insights across China and around the world. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you, sir.